The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Our esteemed speaker for today is Mr. Duad Shah, Vice President of Clinical Partnerships at Altus Labs. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation and speaking at this session. Mr. Shah is an experienced business development, clinical technology, and regulatory professional who currently leads clinical partnerships at Altus Labs since 2022. He previously led the multifunctional teams in translational research and innovation initiatives at the University Health Network across Princess Margaret Cancer Center, Toronto General Hospital, and Toronto Western Hospital. He helped establish both the Joint Department of Medical Imaging AI Center and the Petermann Cardiac AI Program, managing 30+ academic projects in collaboration with the leading AI and clinician scientists. He also leads his own consultancy company, Actuate Consultancy, which focuses on quality and regulation in the MedTech industry. Mr. Shah received his Master of Science in Medical Biophysics from the University of Toronto and his Bachelor of Science from the York University. Over to you, Duad.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Mary. If you'll allow me to share my screen, I will. All right, can everyone confirm that you're seeing? You guys see my screen? Mary, are we good? All right, I don't hear any no's, so I'm assuming we're good.
Yes, you are. Yeah, you are good.
Right, thank you so much. So a little bit of an intro. As Mary said, there's not much else left to say. I've been with Altus Labs for the last year, moving a lot of their initiatives with clinical partners across Canada. Prior to that, I spent 11 years at UHN in various roles. The last 3 or 4 years of which was really setting up and organizing AI activities within the hospital. I worked very closely with industry, so it gave me some insight into what I'm about to dig into here. I also set up my own consultancy firm. I work with small and medium-sized companies to get them through Health Canada and the FDA, setting up quality management systems. And I also sit as part of the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, CABI. I'm one of their CABI coaches. Before I continue, I'll make this very clear. This is not a tech talk. Keep in mind, while I am technical, I've moved away from that and I'm focusing much more on collaborations and relationships. So this talk will be very general across the board with respect to how to partner with hospitals. So first, a little bit about Altus Labs, which gives you a little bit of a precursor around what I'm about to share with you. It comes from years of experience working in the hospital and with Altus Labs. We are an imaging AI company. We help biopharma to run faster, smaller clinical trials. And we use imaging as a mode to prognosticate outcomes in cancer. We've been working with some of the largest cancer centers in Canada. In total, right now, we work with 10 hospitals in Ontario, and we work with 2 provincial bodies. So we have access to data from Alberta and BC. As a result, we currently capture about 50% of Canada's oncology population over the last 10 years. Capture meaning we have access to it, but we don't actually take anything in-house. So we build models with the hospitals. We publish on the results we have in some key journals and at conferences. And our product we sell to biopharma. So I'm not going to go too much into that. Thus far, we've actually trained our model on 180 million images, and we're currently growing our network internationally. So setting the stage, as a biotech company in the AI space, why is it that we want access to hospital data? Why is it? It goes to the theme of how do we partner with hospitals? What's the purpose of this? So the primary purpose here is to access data. Lots of other AI companies out there, as you start, there's tons and tons of open source data. If it's on Kaggle, it's somewhere else. There are a lot of open source data that everyone has access to. So what will set you apart from everyone else is having these key partnerships with hospitals to give you access to some unique data sets. Additionally, the open source data, sometimes it's poorly annotated. It doesn't have a lot of quality to it. So we work with hospitals to get better quality data that's properly annotated with clinical context. Cost reduction. It's much better to work with a team in developing AI models, sharing these resources and expertise to help speed up the process in getting our models out. And lastly, expertise. As AI developers, while we do have scientists in our own team, clinicians are the ones who really give us the insight into what is clinically meaningful that a model should be predicting, and what exactly would fit into the clinical workflow. So you'll notice a specific theme around how I've structured this talk. So deciding to swipe. The first critical step in partnering with a hospital is, who is going to be your partner? So at first, you might think of yourself, I'm presenting this in the lens of you're the company. Many of you here, you might start working for MedTech companies, or you might actually consider becoming an entrepreneur and spinning out your own company at some point. So the first step is, who do you partner with? You might first think, hey, there's a lot of hospitals out there. There are tons of options. So it might first be there's plenty of fish in the sea. But as you go through the process, you'll notice it's actually a little bit more like Tinder. So you've got to swipe left and swipe right. So one of the PIs you come across, that person, for example, here are some of the profiles you might encounter. They've recently wrapped up a fellowship. They're very interested in new technology. They're new to the institution you want to partner with. They really don't have any students and only has a few publications. On the other hand, there's someone else who's very well respected, sits on multiple important committees within the organization. They're on track for administrative leadership and has recently completed an MBA. So they have insight into what it might take to be an entrepreneur. Then there's the very established clinician, is considered an expert in their field. They have a large lab with lots of students, years of experience, and multiple publications. And then there is the up-and-comer. This person gives lots of talks. They're building their publication profile, and they have a few students that are reporting to them. Now, looking at this, you've got 4 profiles here. You might say, hey, let's go for the more established person because that person has lots of publications. They're an expert. Let's lean into that. You might spend a lot of time trying to even get that first meeting with that individual. Similarly, the well-respected individual, the well-respected clinician who might be part of multiple committees and on track for leadership, again, might not have the time to dedicate to you. The up-and-comer already has an established lab. Unfortunately, that person is, it'd be a great candidate, but they've already got their research goal set. They're not really looking to broaden that just yet. So in many cases, the most opportunistic and the ideal person to work with is sometimes the person that is the most green, who recently wrapped up their fellowship, is interested, and will give you a lot of their time. Now it's the first date. So you've picked the person you want to work with. You've engaged with them. Engagement has gone well. You both swiped right, and now you've got the first date. So there's a couple of questions that need to be answered here. Feasibility. So is there a question that can be asked? Is this really a research question? Is the data available from the hospital? Is this a worthwhile question? Can I get data on an ongoing basis? You need to also set the ground rules. Are we going to publish this work? Who's going to have authorship? Are you seeing anyone else? Is there any conflicts here? Is this only going to be a research initiative, or are we looking to commercialize what we put our heads together for? Also, who's going to bring what to the table? You need to establish those roles and responsibilities very early in the process. And importantly, setting expectations. Setting expectations not only for what the research goal is going to be, but also time commitments, research commitments, meeting frequencies. which conferences do we want to attend? Those are things that are very important on the early stages of this relationship. And if it's not, things start to go sideways very easy. Next, it's who's going to pay? Who's paying when we go out? Well, who pays really impacts who owns. If your institution is supporting this work, if the institution that you're partnering with is supporting this work, or the PI is somehow supporting this work, then you lose a lot of ownership on that. So there are a few general themes of partnerships that you'll have with academic institutions, traditional sponsored research, where the institution and the PI is solely doing work for the purpose of the company. So it's kind of a fee-for-service arrangement. There's the more traditional co-development, which is a joint initiative, coming up with something brand new. There's another collaboration style, which is building on something that already exists. Or there's a validation, which is, hey, I've got something out the box. Can you just tell me if I'm going on the right path or not? There's also different options for how to fund the project. There's an industry-funded grant, for example, Innovate, the Digital Supercluster. These are all initiatives, Scale AI. These are all initiatives that fund industry opportunities. There's hospital innovation grants. So if you're working with a specific hospital in a specific department, that department might have an innovation fund through which you can get access to some funds to support the work. Or it can be direct company funded initiative. I'll go into the pros and cons of a few of those later. Again, here's the lovely logo slide of who's paying. As an industry person now on this side of the table, there are a lot of industry opportunities for grants out there. So these organizations fund anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000, all the way up to multi-million-dollar grants to support AI startups and to support data science activities in partnerships with hospitals. They also support students and support interns. So this is a great opportunity to see what's out there. It also gives you a little bit of more control, because if you're bringing in the grant, then you get more ownership on what's to come out of it. So you've established who's paying, you've gone to the first date. Then what's next? We're speeding up this relationship. It's not your typical Tinder relationship or typical online dating. We're jumping straight into getting to know the family. So in an organization, in a large academic healthcare organization, I've boiled it down to these 3 or 4 main groups. There's the institution. They act as the parents. This refers to the internal bureaucratic layers of collaborating with a hospital. I'll go into each of these in my next few slides. There's the PI. He or she's going to be your project champion, your main squeeze. The co-PI, that's the person who the PI will lean on for support, and that person probably knows better how to handle the parents. They've gone through this before. There's the department. So the department to which your PI is affiliated, treat them like the aunts and uncles. They're the ones you need buy-in from, and they're going to give you your support, and they might make things happen with regards to the institution and helping you to push things along. And then there's you, a health AI company with an idea to fix things. So first, the institution. One of the first things you'll actually encounter at the institution is contracts and commercialization. This process will take you probably one of the longest times of the project. It will take up most of your project time. So what type of agreement is it? As I mentioned before, is it sponsored research? Is it a collaboration agreement? The decision you make on what type of agreement you're going after with the organization will impact your ownership of the IP. Again, that leads into how will the IP be shared? What's your revenue model? How exactly will the hospital or the healthcare institution get some form of reimbursement from you? Are they looking to license the data? Does your platform have regulatory approval? And what exactly are you willing to give up to get what you need? So ultimately, it comes down to the scales. So the more you want, the more you need to give up. So as a company, you want data, you want clinical guidance, you want annotations and labels, You want marketing because you want to partner with some of the biggest healthcare and the healthcare institutions out there, someone with big names, and you want their brand. So the more you want, that's the more you need to give up. So what you'll be giving up is IP, potentially equity in your company, royalties, license fees, and research dollars, because you're the one bringing in the research dollars to fund this initiative. The contracting period will probably be one of the more frustrating parts of this, but once you've got a contract in place, it's easy to replicate that multiple times over. And this will take anywhere between 6 and 12 months typically. Now, you pause there. You've butt up against the contracting nightmare that is. You take a step back and you have some introspection. Understand first your state of readiness. Where are we as a company? Are we at we have an algorithm and a model. We have some amazing ideas. So we really need, we think we know what medical imaging, for example, I'm using imaging as an example here. However, we have no data. We need data to train our models. We know to code and we speak Python and we have a business plan. Are you at that stage? Or are you at, hey, we've already built a model on open source data or a partnership elsewhere. We really do need some clinical context for a specific use case. We want to validate this model against a different data set. And we'd love your guidance on some regulatory approval questions we have. Or lastly, you come in saying, you know what, I'm comfortable with my model. I've been training I've been training this model for quite some time. I just need you guys to pilot it and give me some feedback on how well you think it performs, mainly for marketing material. I'm not really looking for anything else. The third option, I will tell you, is your least successful option. So try to land somewhere in the middle. That's the sweet spot of how we want to engage with hospitals to make this work in the data relationship. Continuing along with the institution, no institution in Canada will you ever be able to get clinical data out of it without an REB, without an REB approval. The Research Ethics Board is going to be, it can either be your nightmare or your friend. Even if you want to get access to some of that data for validation, you've still got to go through ethics approval. The questions ethics will typically ask you is the protocol scientifically sound? How are you going to go about getting consent? Consent is a tricky question. So in some cases, if you're looking at a small number of patients, for example, if you're doing an AI model in rare disease, the patient population is very small. So you do have the option of potentially going for consent. On the other hand, if you're looking at something like heart failure, you're talking tens of thousands of patients here. So you need to get a waiver of consent. You might actually bring on more burden to the patient if you're trying to get consent from them. So consent is going to be a big topic as you approach the ethics board. Of course, they're going to ask, is this a real question, or are you really just doing a data fishing expedition? Who are the people on the study team? It's important for the ethics committee to understand, does the study team include researchers who understand how to do research within that institution, who are trained, who are authorized to do research? They'll justify why you need to justify too. Why do you need this much data? Do you absolutely need this much data to answer your research question? Or again, is this a data fishing expedition? Of course, you need to be trained on the Tri-Council Research Core 2. So that's always going to be important from the ethics perspective. Going through ethics approval will probably take you 3 to 4 months. Unfortunately, the ethics process can typically start in parallel with the contracting process, but you won't get your full ethics approval and your stamp of approval to move forward until you've got that contract in place. Then there's IT. What are your IT requirements? You're building a model within the hospital. How will you train that model? How many GPUs do you need? What level of control do you want to have access to? Have you ever gone through a pen test, a penetration test? Has your platform or your software ever had a pen test? How about a threat and risk assessment? Have you done any of that? Do you plan to connect to any clinical systems directly? And importantly, who will maintain this platform? Who's going to maintain the IT support that the hospital or the healthcare institution is provisioning to you for your work? Negotiating with the IT team can take about 2 to 3 months. And the good thing is here, that's a negotiation that can happen in parallel with the ethics team. And I've saved the best for last, privacy and data governance. With the move towards a lot of healthcare AI projects out there, more and more institutions are really buckling down on their data governance practices. They're putting key positions in place with respect to privacy officers specifically for research. They're updating their data governance policies to be more aligned with what's recognized internationally. And you've got to come prepared to answer a lot of these hard questions. Things like, where's the data going to reside? Is it going to reside on-prem or transferred offsite? There are pros and cons around this. If you're residing on-prem, then it's considered very low risk. You might be able to get this project. You might be able to slide through with privacy and data governance pretty smoothly. If you plan to transfer that data offsite, it makes your life a lot easier because you can train your model in the exact environment that you want to train it in. However, you're faced with things like, if, for example, there's PHI that remains in the image or in the data, then you're liable for that also. So that's a key question for you to make a decision on as you grow your company. Is it going to be an on-prem or is it going to be transferred offsite? Again, you're going to be asked, how do you justify the need for this much data? Who's going to de-identify the data? Typically, you can bring in outside tools, but it needs to be a validated outside tool. How will you, again, privacy is still going to ask you, how are you going to go about getting consent? A lot of the same questions that the ethics board is going to ask you, privacy is going to ask you. So you need to be prepared for all of these questions coming at you from multiple directions, from different groups. One of the biggest things is mitigation. So if for some reason patient data that was supposed to be de-identified was not de-identified, and it gets inadvertently exposed, how are you going to handle that? What are your mitigation steps? Unfortunately, the more data you have, then your mitigation steps need to be a lot better in place. And importantly, have you read our policies? Every hospital has their own privacy policies that you need to read and be up to speed on before you can work with them. Why are privacy officers why is this such an important deal? Well, unfortunately, data privacy has been in the news quite often, especially as it relates to AI. In around 2019, 2020, there was a huge amount of data breaches and a lot of lawsuits filed against big companies because patients believed that hospitals shared their data without their consent or in an unsafe manner with companies. So Google, unfortunately, was a center of quite a few of those. Just recently, if you look at the top right from the CBC, 5.6 million patient visits was stolen from about 5 hospitals across Ontario. That was actually only published on November 6th. And there's a general feel from HIPAA, which is is the privacy organization in the US, which gives guidelines around privacy in the US, of will the influx of AI cause more healthcare data breaches? So that's what you're up against. You need to be up to speed on what's the current trends, be prepared to answer these kind of questions with the privacy officers, be aware of what exactly failed with the other companies, and ensure that you can answer those questions to see that you won't fail in the same ways. Now, moving along with the rest of the family. Here's the PI and the co-PI. They'll have their group of students. They might have fellows. There'll be a lot of discussion around authorship. Typically, students may not always be grad students. They might be students that are just doing chart review or interning. The clinical fellows are important because they may offer their services for annotation and labeling. And typically, they will also be the ones to lead a lot of the efforts in publishing the work that's being done. Authorship. As a company, how important is authorship for you? Do you really want to, is it a strong need to have first authorship or lead author? Not always. Being named on the publication is very important for the company. Being named first or lead is not so important. So it's important as part of that relationship building to ensure that the PI gets the first say on how the authorship is going to be split. Protected time. Sorry, just go back. Protected time. Not all PIs have protected time. The greener a clinician that you're working with, they will have less protected time. Protected time refers to time that the department has allocated for them to do research. that they will be compensated for. Regular touch bases. It's important to set up regular touch bases with your PI. If it's not weekly, bi-weekly, just to keep the project moving, or someone else within the team. Conferences, again, plan for conferences. Which conferences do you want to attend? Which ones are high profile for the work that you want to achieve? IP ownership. It can be very tricky. Some PIs want more IP ownership. Some are happy to assign it to yourself. But again, this is some of the stuff that you would discuss early on the first date. And turnaround time. While it's kind of known across the board that working with large institutions, be it academic or healthcare, turnaround time can be very long. Contracting, these are long processes within a hospital because they've got multiple things going on. For you as a company, this is your one focus. This is your bread and butter. For a hospital, an academic institution, and for the clinicians you might be working with, this is not their only focus. They've got multiple things on the go. So while turnaround time might take longer on their part, you need to ensure as a company and as an individual, you are not the blocker that's causing turnaround time to be delayed. You try to avoid any situation where someone from the family, someone from the organization is waiting on you to respond to something. So you should be the one to get those things out fastest. And conflict of interest. This ties into modes of funding. So if you were to do sponsored research directly with the PI, that person will be required to declare that conflict of interest every time. Now, to avoid conflict of interest and to avoid potentially tainting any publication, that's why a grant-supported work is a much better path to follow. Now, the department. The department is the group that typically decides on the protected time of the PI. The department, they want to raise their research profile. They want to show that there's a lot more research dollars coming in. And, they can also help move a few things around. So that gives you a little bit of an insight into the various members of the family, starting at the parents down to the aunts and uncles. And then there's you. You saw this that, hey, why is it you want to work with healthcare data? Well, in a 2013 report, it was estimated that worldwide, there was about 153 exabytes of data being generated in the year 2013. For context, 1 exabyte is about 1 billion gigs. In 2020, that number was multiplied by 15, which represented a 48% year-over-year growth. And it resulted in a generation of 2,300 exabytes of data being generated in 2020. So where's all that data coming from? It's being generated from smartphones, medical imaging, health records, medical devices, wearables, payer records, genomic sequences, and pharmaceutical research and drugs. Now, at the same rate of growth, it's estimated that by the end of 2013, in the year 2013, 7,500 exabytes of data would have been generated in healthcare. There are more and more wearables. Excuse me, your trackers, all the data that your tracker collects, all that's considered healthcare data. Apple's actually doing a very interesting study using their wearables to track healthcare data. That there is what's actually increasing the amount of data being generated yearly. Now you're a data person. Let's look at where the data is coming from. If anyone here has a data science background, this would be really boring to you. But in healthcare, I've discussed in a hospital setting, for example, in the hospital setting, your data is primarily coming from health monitoring, your patient exams, patient-generated health data, lab results, and medical imaging. That's broadly speaking the 5 areas in which generate the most hospital EHR data. That data comes in mostly unstructured. About 30% of it is 30% of it is only 30% of it is structured. 70% of that data is considered unstructured. And you have to make considerations for where is that data located? Is it all in the same place? Is it in multiple repositories? What's the structure of that data, as I mentioned? What's the data format? There are multiple formats of the data. Is there definitions for all the data? Is there a data dictionary to detail as a tech company? What are all of the healthcare definitions? What does this stuff mean? Along with what I've shown you with these 5 areas, depending on the size of the institution and on the complexity of care, add in a stream for genomics, add in a stream for radiation therapy, chemotherapy, surgery. What you'll discover as you walk through the healthcare data and as you begin this journey is that the folks on the commercialization end of the hospital and the contracting end, they have extremely high value for the data. However, as you can see here, the data is extremely fragmented. It's in multiple repositories. You're not just going to them, and it's not a case where it's here, it's like Amazon, go on Amazon and pick what you want and get it. No, work has to be done to extract that data, to clean that data, to make it useful for you to train your models. So you're only looking to curate a small chunk of that data. It's never ever a plug and play process. Now, why is this a big problem? Here's a case in point. I'm going to use a hypothetical situation. A cancer survivor received radiation and chemotherapy as a young lady over 20 years ago. Unfortunately, she still has medical problems and now deals with a large number of other specialists. And many of them are new to her specifics since she's moved from Nova Scotia to Ontario. As a result, guess what? The continuity of her records and care is now broken. There's no system where she can log in and have access to her entire medical record. If a new doctor wants to see some specific information about her past condition, there's no place for that clinician to actually go to. They're relying on that patient's memory for most of what their clinical history is going to be. That there is a broken system, that there is causing significant fragmentation in the data. Now, you have to ask yourself, what do you bring to this relationship? You know what you want. You want data. You want to have access. You want to build IP. But what exactly are you bringing to the relationship? Well, you're bringing funding. You're going to bring the research funding. You'll also bring probably a team of data scientists, yourself or others. You might have an analyst or two who's going to work with you to submit ethics approvals and work with you to submit for grants and conferences. And of course, you'll be bringing in project management experience because you can't rely on the PI. The PI is swamped for time to manage the project. Even if this is your project, even if this is a joint project with the hospital, in most cases, you're expected to manage this project on your own. But what's important, what you really need to leverage, which a lot of companies unfortunately fail to leverage this, and it's an important factor, is as the industry partner, you're the person that has that network with Hospital One that you're currently engaged with, and possibly 5 or 6 other hospitals. What is important from a research perspective, and that project manager, that PI, that clinician scientist that you're working with, is they also want to raise their research profile. So it's important for them because if you're doing the same work at one hospital and you're replicating much of that at another hospital, then that means you're in a place where you're cleaning data in one place, you're also cleaning it somewhere else. Those two investigators, those two clinician scientists would love to speak to each other about sharing not their data with you necessarily, but sharing their data between the network that you've just created. So inherently, by working with multiple hospitals, you are also creating the special network where they can start sharing data and answering questions that they're more interested in. So research questions that drive their work, or clinical questions that traditionally they wouldn't have access to, because guess what? The data would have already been cleaned now. So after all this, after going through the gamut the family has put down for you, you've realized, hey, there's some trouble in paradise. The data isn't what you expected. It's not as clean as you thought it would be. There's a lot of holes in the data, missing fields. It's just not as much as what you thought it was. Everything is a lot harder than you anticipated. Going through the privacy groups, going through contracting has taken a toll on you. The PI has gotten busy with other things, internal demands, potentially COVID. So the PI just doesn't have the time to commit to the project as they once did. But you've put so much time into this. You've dedicated all of your energies into this project, into this new relationship. Everyone's already familiar with each other. You know the students, you know the fellow, they know your team. There's a sense of familiarity. You meet regularly. You might have gone out for drinks sometimes. So you ask yourself, what now? Where do we go from here? It's a stuck project. Where you go is you stay the course. You stay the course, you keep pushing through, because all of the hard work that you've done already, even if you leave now, you've still got to replicate that somewhere else. You stay the course, things will get better. The tide will turn, and eventually, it will right itself. Of course, with your effort, with a lot of effort and a little bit of prodding. What you do have to ask yourself, and as an industry person, one of the challenges here right now is understanding when exactly has this run its course? When has the relationship run its course? You've got an overarching project, things have eventually, you stayed the course, the project turned around. When exactly do you end the project? Do you break up the relationship? Hey, but you've already curated this much data together. Everyone knows each other. Are you going to look at another project? And this is one of the hardest questions you're going to have to answer. And one of the hardest decisions you'll have to make around when exactly do you say, all right, we've wrapped up here, let's move on. How are we going to maintain that hospital? Don't worry, hope is on the horizon. One of the challenges that you would have encountered, as I said, is access to data. The data isn't being cleaned. The Alliance for Artificial Intelligence in Healthcare is a global organization that's really doing a lot of good work in bringing some of the challenges in doing AI research within healthcare. They're bringing a lot of that to the fore, engaging with the FDA, engaging with other stakeholders, and how we can fix these problems. They actually, just earlier this week, released a white paper that addresses a lot of these issues around the lack of a unified patient record and how exactly having a unified patient record will not only just empower research, but also empower clinical care. The Canadian College of Academics based out in Ottawa, they released in October of this year a very lengthy publication called "Connecting the Dots." The dots being healthcare data. The use case that I provided, the example that I provided the young lady, came from the Connecting the Dots. It's this concept of we're in a stage of being constantly risk averse and being able to share data, but our lack of being able to share data significantly creates barriers for improving healthcare across Canada. There is a lot of guidance in there. Sorry, a lot of guidance. They're using this to help move policy along. So it's actually at the federal level to make this proposition around how can we share data broadly across Canada. Locally here in Ontario, the former Minister of Health authored another white paper referred to as the Ontario Health Data Council report. Exactly the same theme around the need to figure out a way to share data safely to help empower research and to really move clinical care along, because we aren't stable. It's a dynamic environment that we're living in. People are moving constantly, and their care and their healthcare data needs to follow them. As I said, hope still remains on the horizon. We've worked with many hospitals and many other organizations to help put together a project data risk assessment. So looking at things like what's the risk, the users of the data, data access and transfer, how many directed identifiers might remain in the data, is it aggregated data, what's the sensitivity of the data. So if we understand what these risks are, and we identify them, then we come up with a risk score. So some hospitals are adopting this mode. By having a risk score, it will help you move through things like contracting and privacy significantly faster. What you see here is a matrix that we proposed to a few of the non-academic hospitals, so some of the community hospitals, and this helped reduce our contracting period down to half. Lastly, as much as all the troubles, as much as these things, You've had multiple challenges along the way. You feel as though it's a burden to go through all the offices. Keep at it. Keep at it. Keep pushing through. It will get better as an organization. That's the guidance that you need to. That's the framework, the mind frame you need to kind of move forward with. However, also be open to other opportunities, because what you've learned at one, you can't stay still. You've got to be moving, and you've got to keep being active with other organizations. So stick to that one, keep building that relationship, but don't turn any other ones away. That's it for me. I will now leave the floor open for questions.